If you multiply 70 by 19, that tells you how thick he wanted the wall. He worked on that wall up until the day that he died, and would often be out there with them working on it, and insisted that the work continue after he died to complete the wall. It would have been completed and would have been bigger than the present Israeli copycat had his brothers not resorted to fighting, because there was infighting that occurred. But he was building this wall that would act as a buffer. So ships coming in from the coast were to see that wall, this monolith. And the only way that ships would be able to get in from the ports is they would obviously have an opening in the wall or some sort of structure. But he wanted this wall to be there so that way people that were guards would be able to see the Franks from the Mediterranean far out coming in. And they'd be able to protect it, because Egypt, if you look at where it is geographically, it's quite a strategic location. And being in a strategic location makes you weak as well, because it leaves you open to attack. So in World War II, that was one of the places that Rommel wanted to secure. And this is why Egypt is such an important place in terms of its location. So Salah ad-Din wanted a massive wall to be built up to control it. In the year 573, Salah ad-Din left Egypt and marched into Asqalan, near Gaza. And he drove the Frankish troops from the area and established his rule. Asqalan is the place that many scholars hold as the birthplace of Imam Shafi'i. His parents coming from there. And some scholars hold Imam Shafi'i to have been an Egyptian Palestinian because of the bordering area. This place is also the location of Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who was an Egyptian Palestinian. So we still see that even in this time, the Palestinians, for the most part, are making up the bulk of the big ulama that are in Sham. And so Ibn Hajar, who we'll be reading about later, about 200 years, 300 years later, is coming from Asqalan. The brothers of Salah ad-Din put the Crusader forces to flight in 574 AH as wave after wave of Crusaders appeared on the horizon as driven by the Catholic Church. By the Catholic Church, we don't mean just the Roman Rite. We mean all seven madhabs, or all seven rites of the Catholic Church. Byzantine Rite, Roman Rite, Coptic Rite, Ethiopic Rite, and the rest of them. These were the madhabs of the Catholic Church. It's often a misnomer that people will make when they talk about the Catholic Church. They'll say the Roman Catholic Church. Well, the Roman Rite is the biggest, but it's not all of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is big, just like if someone referred to Sunnis and said the Hanbali Sunnis. No, Hanbalis are within the Sunnis, and Sunnis are a big group, and Hanbalis are within them. And so the Catholic Church is a big group, and they have seven madhabs within them. Although these madhabs fought with each other about a number of topics, some of them included the following. For the Roman Rite, there was a huge dispute between the Roman Rite, and please remember, at this time there were no Protestants, there were no Baptists, there was no C of E, there were no Quakers, there were no evangelicals, there were no Episcopalians, Lutherans, Peace Lutherans, Pentecostals, Oneness Pentecostal, right? Seventh-day Adventists, Foursquare Gospel. That didn't exist. There was one church. It was a Catholic Church. And anyone who wasn't was persecuted violently. But there was a dispute regarding a particular matter, and it had to do with the canonicity of their books. The Roman Rite of the Catholic Church accepts what are called the apocryphal books, diminutively in English, which are generally the deuterocanonical books, like Tobit the First, Tobit the Second, First and Second Maccabees, and other books, Judith, Susanna, and others. The Ethiopic Church accepted those books and also others, which brought the Ethiopic canon to 100 books. The Douay copy of the Bible is 81 books. Do not ever let yourself be confused in a discussion with a Christian in which you say there are different versions of the Bible, and they say no, there are different translations. Stop them as courteously as you can and say no, the Douay Bible is 81 books. The Gaiz Ethiopic Bible is 100. The Coptic Bible is of a similar size. There were disputes about these books and the doctrines contained within them. Interestingly enough, there is a book in which, because you will find Protestants today saying, the Muslims, there's so much folklore in the Qur'an. There's folklore, apocryphal stories, fables and mythology. For example, the Prophet Isa alayhi salam being born and speaking while he was a baby. And then there's another fable in which the Prophet Isa alayhi salam forms a clay bird and breathes into that bird, and it becomes a living bird. That shouldn't be something difficult, because before there was any such thing as a Protestant, the Catholic Church believed that. The Catholic Church today believes that. The Catholic Church today believes these things. That he breathed into a bird and that he spoke when he was a baby. These are things that are within the Catholic Church. The table that came down, things that Protestants now laugh about because they've reconfigured their theology. Things that the table spread with Surah Al-Ma'idah, in which the table of food that came down, that was part of that's believed by the Catholic Church. That's believed by the Byzantine Rite. These aren't things that are in dispute at all, with the exception of the Protestants, who have 33,000 among all the different Christian groups, are the most sectarian. So it's very important that you understand during this time, although the Catholic Church had all of these internal disputes over whether the Pope in Rome is a bishop among bishops, or whether he is the supreme bishop, as he claims that he is the second part of the Trinity on earth when he speaks in ex cathedra, that is God speaking, and whether he takes the place of the second part of the deity on earth. That's what the dispute is. The Coptics do not accept the Roman bishop as the second part of the Trinity and the vicar of Christ. They don't accept it. But the Roman Rite believes the Pope has the ability to forgive sins, to remove people from purgatory, there was another dispute as well over whether purgatory and limbo are of the same caliber. So you'll have the Pope today, Pope Benedict XVI, express doubt regarding limbo, but not purgatory, in which case Christians that are not fully reconciled to God when they die spend time in purgatory to be purified. Some of the churches had disputes with their interpretation of it. There were disputes regarding the Eucharist. Is Christ's body, when you say the words over the benediction, does it become his literal flesh and blood? There were then disputes over was when Mary, because there's a lot of Mariolatry in which Mary is almost worshipped in a sense by the Catholic Church. But there were disputes among them over how to initiate and carry out that shirk. Among some of the mushriks of the Catholic Church, they said, no, Mary was taken up as the queen of the universe and never died a bodily death. And so you make intercession through her, in which case she makes intercession through Christ, who in turn makes intercession for you to God the Father. But then there were some of them who said, no, she died an earthly death, but she was still taken up and is the queen of the universe. But they were all agreed that she was perpetually a virgin, that she is the queen of the universe, the supreme mediatrix. And so if she's mentioned in a prayer in which you call on her regarding forgiveness of sins or what have you, then it will be granted. So there's all this dispute, but they're agreed Muslims are an issue. At this time, the main excuse that the Catholic Church had for people not becoming Muslim, and it's still the default position of the Greek Orthodox Church. If you speak to Father Dr. Andreas Michaelidis, who he's retired as the head in this city, but you can still contact him, Still today, the Greek Orthodox Church teaches that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a renegade priest in the Catholic Church that started his own religion. And so when you ask them how they would explain the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, how he came about, his godliness, his knowledge, all these other things, they say he is a renegade priest from the Catholic Church. The Protestants are more inventive. He had epilepsy, his demons. But the Roman Catholic Church have hung on to him being a renegade priest. He just knows too much about Christianity. He must have been a bishop or a cardinal. Had to have been. So with that, we're looking at the Christian world still trying to stay unified regarding the Muslims. In 565 AH, the Khalifa Al-Mustadi bi-Amrillah died at 36 years of age. The 34th Khalifa to come into power from the Abbasid governance was An-Nasir li-Dinillah. An-Nasir li-Dinillah. He was the son of Al-Mustadi, and he ruled immediately on the death of his father. An earthquake came in the same year in the land of Irbil that was so horrible the water in the river near it ran red with blood. So that's how many people died in Irbil. Irbil is in Iraq. If you actually do some research, you'll find that was the site of major fighting in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, because the people of Irbil do not surrender. That's one of the things they don't do. The people of Irbil do not surrender. And there was huge fighting. Huge. It was unbelievable how difficult the seasoned, insuperable, infallible Americans were put to flight by the Kurds of Irbil, who would survive Saddam's mustard gas attacks, who would survive the Iranian invasions, who'd survived the Mongol invasions, who'd survived all these other invasions. Do we really think the people who've survived the Mongols and the Iranians and mustard gas, that they're going anywhere unless Allah makes them? They're there to stay. And so Irbil is a great place in history. Salah ad-Din Al-Ayubi, who was in conflict with the then Khalifa regarding governance and resisting the Crusaders, took Homs from An-Nasir in 576 AH and removed the power base of the Khalifa. What added more humiliation was that it occurred in front of the Khalifa, who was on the battlefield at the time. So Salah ad-Din Al-Ayubi is differing with the Khalifa. Remember, we have to rewind back to Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, the agreement that he made with the Khalifa of the time, Al-Qa'im bi-Amrillah. The Khalifa agreed them, nullified his Khilafah, the ulama come back in. And so Salah ad-Din Al-Ayubi, notice how the relationship is. He's conquering Egypt and doing these things. He drops the Khalifa letter, I've conquered Egypt. He goes, takes over big sections of Sham, Halab. By the way, I've conquered Sham. It's not a relationship in which they're equals. He holds the Khalifa, as the ulama did then, and how they are to, as subordinate. Rulers are subordinate to the ulama because they are the people that are really ruling. So Salah ad-Din takes Homs from An-Nasir because An-Nasir, Salah ad-Din sees An-Nasir as the Khalifa has no power anyway because the ulama are in charge. But number two, he doesn't have any military might. So how can he hold Homs? And at that point, An-Nasir was in two minds about whether to even fight the Crusaders. Remember, 100,000 dead when they first arrive in Antioch. Another 100,000 in Jerusalem, and you're in two minds about whether to fight. The great historian Ibn al-Athir walks into the masjid during Ramadan. He's a big alim and a historian with a platter of food on his shoulder. And he sits the platter down. And he starts eating. This is Ramadan, it's the daytime. And they said to him in anger, the people, how dare you eat during Ramadan? How dare you eat during Ramadan? Who are you to eat in this month of Ramadan? This is a sanctified month. And he said, I'm eating because the Muslims are dead. Because had the Muslims been alive, then we would not be looking at the Dome of the Rock and Masjid al-Aqsa as churches and as palaces. And we would not be allowing ourselves to remain in this condition. So the Muslims are dead.